All right, everybody, we are back with part 2 of
Adventures in the Shift.
Adventures in the Shift. That's what we're calling it. Like, my nature is like, I like to make the stuff, like the recording, and then I don't want to touch anything afterwards. I don't want to come up with a title. I don't want to do any of that. I want it to be spontaneous and I want to walk away from it.
Uh-huh.
And you like a little bit more structure.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is good. So now we have like a title for this. I mean, I guess I say
You
this.
came up with that.
I guess you're right. Like so what was just witnessed was there's a picture I have of myself in my mind, which may not exactly line up with how I actually am in reality. Is that what?
I can't wait until we get to collapsing false identities.
All right. So what is part 2? What are we talking about?
Well,
where are we picking up?
Part 1 was a wild adventure through themes that you've brought to the table of collapsing false timelines, how it relates to meta paradigm shift. And so we started talking about our demonstration, or the way that we are manifesting in our lives, the shift. And we're particularly on an adventure right now, like one that we planned out and chose. And it's partly in alignment with the Starboard and our desires to bring that on the ground. And it's also partly our desire to go to places like Jekyll Island.
Right.
And do kind of like the work that Ross Ben is really deeply integrated with, which is taking in our surroundings into our field, neutralizing them, and now changing like the space that you're in by changing your attitude towards. So we left off, we told the Jekyll Island story, and we gave teasers for Hostel in the Forest.
We gave teasers for Hostel in the Forest. So let's begin by talking about the Hostel in the Forest.
Hostel in the Forest. The Hostel in the Forest is a place that I stumbled upon a few years ago. Looking for a place to stop from Pennsylvania to southern Florida. And it's a hostel. All right. But it's not like any other hostel I've ever been to, and it's pretty much in the name because it's a hostel in the forest.
Most hostels are urban.
Right. So this is totally deep in the forest. Like, you have to take a treacherous road, right? The road that we took back in my
treacherous is relative, but like to the car.
Not in a tiny. You're in a tiny little Toyota Prius. Yeah,
to the car, it's a little bit treacherous, but it's not treacherous like you're on the side of a mountain.
No, right. And so
there's an initiation to get onto the campus.
Right, and you're deep in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that even speaks to, like, we were playing with the word hostile and hostile. Right. Like, hostile is a strong word, but there is like hostility in the natural world. Right? And we were talking about that last time, about looking at our environment. Nature, not nature as in like what I'm separate from, like everything is nature, but looking at that as a feedback loop for how can I rearrange my internal systems to have a more fluid experience in this dream walk, and therefore be able to easily just like snap and collapse things that aren't real, that are sucking energy out of me. So what's your description of Hostel in the Forest?
So we went there in November.
Right, Brunswick, Georgia.
It's Brunswick, Georgia. So first, like, layout, like, where is it? So it's literally like 10 minutes off of 95. Like, it's very convenient for travelers.
Yes, and it was there before 95 came so close to its entrance. Right.
In fact, 95, west of 95 is Hostel in the Forest, and then east is Jekyll Island, and they're I think they're 16 miles apart. And you're absolutely right in terms of, like, it's not like any other hostel. It doesn't fit like the typical mental model of what a hostel looks like.
Right.
It felt more like a camp.
Yeah.
Not a campsite per se. It felt like almost like a
bungalows.
It reminded me it was very similar to in the structure, like the physical structure of where I went in Peru to the ayahuasca retreat 10 years ago.
Right.
Like the way that there were these individual bungalows, there was a central kitchen or eating area, just the way it was kind of set up. To me, I really, like, the first time we went last November, the first time we went together, which was the first time I went at all, I immediately resonated. I resonated with there's a constant in the structure of the place. Like, it's always there. And and it speaks to a certain sort of person. Not everyone's the same, but they all hold something in similarity.
Yeah.
One, they found this place, and then two, that they wanted to go to this place.
Right.
So like that takes, like, you're already
you have to be willing to sleep in the cold if it's cold.
Right. Oh yeah, because it was cold there.
There's beds, there's bunks, there's pillows. You have to be willing to use a non-flush, non-porcelain toilet.
Right.
Their bathrooms are beautiful. I mean, you go up a spiral staircase,
Right.
and then they're painted with these amazing three-dimensional murals.
The primary buildings are geodesic domes, like built in the 70s.
Yes.
Like you feel like you're stepping into a different world. Like it was the food, the dinner at least was shared, and it's a vegan place.
And there's like a circle, a gratitude circle before dinner where everyone gets to connect, share announcements, and be in community.
Yes.
Which is something that I appreciated pre-COVID.
Yes.
When I was there, that was like something I really appreciated, because you get to see the dynamics of the people, like the staff that are working there, and like even so the social structure is that, but then the larger social structure is that the staff turnover, like they have kind of guidelines about how long staff are allowed to work trade there, how long the managers are allowed to manage for. Like it can't exceed 6 months.
Okay.
So there's always like a rolling, like there's no one person that holds it together except for the founder. And he only visits for 1 hour on a Saturday.
And we got to meet him.
Right. It's this very hands-off, and yet it's like you said, it's structured in such a way that like a Waldorf classroom, really.
Right.
Like there's just enough structure that you feel safe, and like you know how to flow, but there's no like rules or confines or like and because it's so deep in the forest and you're under such dense shade, like it is cooler, like it is more hostile in regards to like, in a tent, at least like your body heat. Like I almost prefer a tent. So it's almost like you also have to be willing to dance with the elements while you're there, including your own elements, like getting down out of your hut and either peeing outside or going across the short walk to the composting high-rise toilets. And do you want to get into why we were there?
Well, I want to say one more thing before we do. So, tying this into this idea of meta paradigm shift and collapsing false timelines and all of that. Part of what's implied in this line of thought is like, well, what would life look like if we weren't part of the false reality? And that's kind of a rhetorical question because we don't know. But in my mind, particularly during a transitional period, and I think this is probably even true, like I know a lot of catastrophe focused friends. Like I've got friends who are like, it's all going to collapse, and then it's like, it's post-apocalyptic and that sort of stuff. I don't necessarily see that as the future, but I'm like, who knows? Like, But I see environments like that, like what we experience, like the way there was a structure, people were coming and going, there was a structure of some degree of stability of people who run the place, but then there are travelers who are coming and going. There was a lot of like sharing of information. This is, I mentioned this in what I personally found. What I enjoyed about it was, so it was a vegan place. I'm not a vegan person, and they're typically what comes along with that dietary title is like more so a lifestyle, a worldview, and so forth. And to be able to go into another worldview, like which not necessarily is something which I hold personally, but be able to like sit with it and to experience it, to hear that, and not feel a need to like be confrontational.
It's vegetarian because they have eggs. They raise chickens. They eat eggs.
Wasn't all the food? Oh, but yes.
Dairy.
There was they're talking vegan a lot with the meal, so I'm probably holding on to that.
Yeah, there are people who come who are vegan and they have that worldview.
And it has like a little bit of staples down to that, like in terms of what the whole point I'm trying to make is being able to necessarily go and travel to other like contained communities which have a contained value system, where there is some overlap. And being able to like like the excitement and the joy of like blending with it and then leaving.
And it invites opportunities for you to make those shifts.
Okay.
Like those very personal shifts, right? Like maybe not a meta paradigm shift, but the personal shift of like coming up against something where you're like, oh, like veganism, which they're not vegan there, but like just the eye roll, that inner eye roll one could experience at a vegan or non-vegan. And
the eye roll goes either way.
And how to meet that and collapse that, because there's a greater canopy in can't literally, but also like metaphorically, spiritually, there's a greater spirit holding this place together, which I like to think is the forest. Okay. Like this is the hostel in the forest, and it's like the spirit of the forest. Okay. Is kind of what's speaking to people, and like everyone around the gratitude circle always ends up talking about somehow like how the forest has like spoken to them. Okay. And it just makes the, like if you're doing internal collapse work, like or internal shifting, that environment, like with the shade and like some of the darkness, the coolness it provides, it allows for people to meet in dynamic ways and come up against like really different worldviews and ways of doing things, right? Because everyone's living communally. To like, for it to be soft and for it to be like, we're in this together. And we're only here for a short time. Yes. We're not married. We don't have to like live, we're not in like an intentional community that we're like somehow contractually tied to this or like monetarily dependent, blah, blah, blah.
So because we wanted this one to be short, so let's go on to like, why were we there?
Right, so I think we also need to say that this place was founded on July 4th. Right? So we got to meet the founder. He told his story, which is amazing. You should go to Hostel in the Forest. Go and you can be there on a Saturday and have tea with Tom, because I can't repeat his story. But what was really significant was the founding and opening of the hostel was on a July 4th. And he had this big picnic, and he literally just picked someone like a biker, like a hitchhiker off the what was not 95 yet, and just brought him in and was like, here, I have a place for you to stay.
It was his first, he told us the whole story of like of how he came up with this idea of wanting to have a hostel in the forest, and like how it unfolded. He built it, and like hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, and then finally he built it, and like no one knows about this. Like how am I going to get? And his very first like overnight guest was July 4th, 1975, and the juxtaposition, we talked a lot about that, versus that that compared to the Federal Reserve and Jekyll Island.
When they're so close together.
They're so close together, and everything about, like, there's a lot of really interest. So this goes into this kind of like dream walking sort of element, because when you go and you compare them, so if we want to think about the like the American ideal or the concept of what the United States is, and we talked a lot about this while we were there, because the manager, the person who was running it, or the couple that was running it, he was a German.
Yeah.
And so there was a European flavor. He was probably 25, 26. So he was like a young man, but he also was European. So we had a really nice conversation with him. Mm-hmm. But it was, and there was a French Canadian there too. Mm. And so, at least to my mind, there was a lot of like these ideas of like, this is American, this is European, this is Canadian.
It was
and
a
like
more international flavor.
There was a more international flavor.
Previous times that I've been there hasn't been that as much. But he said that the hostel, when it did first open, it was mostly international travelers, because in the 70s, hostels were still not very, very American.
They probably still aren't.
Well, they're not, but there's definitely more of them, and especially on the East Coast, there's not as many.
Right.
And so a lot of his initial, for the first 10 years, he said, throughout the 70s, it was international guests. Right. And so it feels kind of, post-COVID has been a big deal for them, because they had really, they had a whole thing that there's a lot there that they needed to go through with COVID. And so now they're finally completely doors open. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that maybe like what they're attracting again now is like an influx of like international travelers. But so July 4th, really close to Jekyll Island.
And it being like this kind of, there's this idea like this, and I'm just going to use the American because we're using like these as talking points of like, you go and you make your own way, like this, like, and this is done. Like he went out there and he was like, I had a vision and I went and like, there were obstacles and I did it, and like that's the American way kind of story. Versus Jekyll Island, which is like a bunch of like, these are the elite moneyed class meeting behind the scenes to plan something and misconstrued with a name like Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor has reserves, and that was the juxtaposition which I find so interesting, and that being like the sand dollars to dollars, this whole sort of like this idea of
the sand dollars, we got those. And then we went to Hostel in the Forest.
And then we went to the Hostel in the Forest, right.
It was like, and so first I want to say that he's also been buying up land all around since the 70s to preserve the forest. Right. I think it's up to like 145 acres or something like that. And there is where like this space would value the sand dollar over the dollar. And like we had just done that walk. Right. And then we walked into Hostel in the Forest with like already, people knew who we were because there was already like posts on the website. Right. And like the managers, we had talked with them months before that we were coming to do a Starboard ceremony. Right. So, do you want to say anything about that?
On the Starboard ceremony?
Yeah, or just the wrap up of the history behind the Hostel in the Forest.
I don't have anything more to say about the history.
Okay, that would just say part one we talked about interdependence, codependence, and now we just talked about independence. Okay. Like Independence Day. Right. And like the independence that a lot of people carry when they're at the Hostel in the Forest. Right. A lot of them are going out and like making it on their own, like they're going out and traveling. Right. And the hostel is a place to stop, or a place to, what Tom said, like get away. Mm-hmm. This is supposed to be a retreat to go within. Right. And do some of that kind of collapsing work. And maybe even it's like a ripe place for doing that paradigm shift stuff. And I would say we experienced an immense, like, we were so in it because we were facilitating the Starboard ceremony. Right. And then the second night, we played again with the River and Stars ceremony that didn't record that one time. Yes. Is this okay?
Yeah, this is okay.
Okay. So, so we had that experience.
So we did the Starboard. The Starboard ceremony is, in my opinion, having done this many times, it's like that's easy.
Yeah.
That's an easy thing to do. You've got the Starboard. People can understand the stars. There's a general curiosity with astrology.
Yeah.
It's always been very. It has a magnetic quality to it, and so we did that the first night, and it went really well.
Yeah.
It was like fun. It was enjoyable. We had like it was the very first time we've got the big living ephemeris. It was the first time we wrote down all the people.
Everyone got to sign it.
Everyone got to sign it. We've been talking about it, so that was the first time we did it. So it was really, really good. And then the next night we were going to go and do the Susquehanna Mystery, like the river and stars.
Well, yeah, like we did, like that time that it didn't record.
Right.
There was just such a beautiful, obvious connection between, like, you opened this chapter on collapsing false timelines, and then you just intuitively were like, we should bring the river to this Fellowship of the Boards. And then you did, and we talked about how the river is a macro example of how the rites of the 40th parallel are a macro example of collapsing false timelines.
Right.
And there was just so much. I mean, we got into like the elementals, the beings, river magic, etc. And then that translates to like ancestors and like stars, and that connection was so fluid. And so we attempted to do that again. Okay. Right, the second night. And what was that like for you?
So we left on this trip.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, and the night before we left, or maybe it was even the day we did our private Starboard ceremony.
Oh, right.
For the final straw, the final phase.
Yes.
And we picked cards, and we picked like tough cards. And so that's like
we picked dragon cards, and we had never picked dragon cards before.
There was that, and then there was a rune, and then there was a difficult card.
They were all heavy.
They were heavy. They were intense. They were intense.
Intense. Yes.
And I play with this all the time. This idea of like whenever you pick a card, like what is like a self-fulfilling prophecy? What is like, a guidepost? What is like I'm open to that. Like that to me, that's part of the fun. What I certainly don't do is say that these cards, these things have power over me. Yeah. But they kind of do. you don't pick something kind of intense, and then you're like, oh, what you're gonna go and like some like big deal, like you're about to go get married, and you're like, okay, let me go pick my cards. Like, cards, what is this marriage gonna be? You pick the card and be like, the Tower, like the real intense card from tarot. Like, you can't unforget that. Like, as much as you be like, well, that's just a card or what have you. It's in your mind. It becomes real just because you did it.
You can't fuck around with oracle cards.
You can't forget them. You can't put the genie back in them up. So that being said, I had that. Like, I was aware of that coming in. So we go and there was like some hostility in the overall, like every time you travel, like that's part of the travel experience. Like, it is like you're meeting the unknown. You're meeting you made this very clear distinction before our conversation, before we start recording today. You're like, we're not on vacation, we're traveling. And I'm like, well, what's the difference? And that was an interesting conversation. But like, the idea is like, vacation has an implication of like, I'm here to like relax,
you're
enjoy
vacating.
I'm vacating. And traveling is like more like an experience. And so
traveling, you're applying yourself.
You're applying yourself.
Just like the difference between retreat and immersion.
And the way where I'm going with this is like, there are like the ebbs and the flows.
Right.
And so part of like what you were saying was, particularly with this, when we went to the Hostel in the Forest, we're leaving in mid-March, we're in Pennsylvania, we're thinking Florida, and we have a picture in our mind like, oh, it's warm down there. Oh, I'm gonna pack for like our last step our last stage in this trip is going to be like 90-degree weather. Yeah. And so I think both of us like painted a picture in our mind of like, oh, we're gonna pack warm. Yeah, we're gonna be in Georgia for a day or two, but it's still gonna be warm. And so when we got there, we're like, oh, we're in the cabin with just screened-in walls
That's how they all are.
That's how they all are. There's no heat. There's nothing like that.
Yeah.
And it's like low 40s are the lows, and you're like, okay, this is like, like that being like a little bit of like meeting the different things.
Biological hostility.
Biological, like it was the dampness in the canopy. So all these things. So coming into like the Susquehanna Mystery, like I came into that ceremony personally with when you talk about the stars and the astrology, that's easy and that's light.
Yeah.
Susquehanna Mystery it's complex.
The first rite is destruction.
The first rite is destruction. The whole thing is about like it's all of this stuff which like no one really wants to hear. Like, I mean, some people like it. Like some people like to go like, oh, let's lean into the uncomfortable darkness. It's complicated. It's like all of these sort of things.
Yeah.
And so to me, it was a complicated, and I hadn't done it for a while.
Yeah.
And it came with like let's go back to like the ayahuasca. This was it was ayahuasca,
That's right.
like part of the ayahuasca experience is the purge, is the discomfort, is like, you're gonna have to go and get comfortable with the discomfort, and it's not gonna be pretty.
Yeah.
And so like I'm like, I mean, it wasn't really that big of a deal, but like to you and me,
right? It was a very different flavor.
It was a very different flavor.
And I think that's what's so important is like we're like dream walking, having these like significant, cool like adventures in the shift. We're like all like kind of high on ourselves,
right?
Like not high.
Inebriated.
Not inebriated, but also not like high and mighty, but just like high on joy.
Right.
Right? Like we were like, this is like, okay, this is really like, we're really putting feet to this.
Right.
And then I think like any kind of, meta paradigm shift. When I sit with that, sometimes I'm like, that's like shamanic work. You're having a foot, like you're stepping out of this world, but you're still tied to a body. There's still a form.
Mm-hmm.
You're still in the paradigm, but you're meta. You're going meta out or above or whatever.
Outside of that container and...
Yeah, but I think sometimes the meta is going even deeper in.
Okay.
Right? Going dark.
Right.
Going like the meta being...
Deeper into the cave?
Underworld. Deeper into the cave, right? Like I'm bringing like a very Celtic flavor now to this. And I feel like that's what we experienced the second night. It's like we were bringing the river, and maybe there was an element of like we weren't fully prepared, like just for the cold.
Right.
We weren't fully prepared for like the magnitude of what was actually birthed.
Right.
Because I think this is twofold. One, it was like I think everyone was a little bit like, whoa, that was intense. But still like brought something home from it.
No one knew what they experienced.
And no one knew what we were experiencing because it was such a different flavor for us in the way that we facilitate together. Right? And so that was like jarring. But then also what it birthed was like, I would say like a few sessions ago when we had that fellowship of the boards that totally like failed online, like the internet stopped for some reason. The audio didn't record, and it was almost like the story in my head is that there was some sort of conception there, and all the technology needed to get out of our face, because there was like Erin Greer was there, right? She was like midwifing this thing that came through that no one else knows, but for us, we were like, that was new, like that connection was powerful. And then taking it into the forest, we took the river, the Susquehanna River, into the forest, into the hostel in the forest, which holds a big forest spirit. And it was like, that was the delivery. Like if this is a baby, like conception to labor and delivery. And then that night.
Well, before we get there, so because we're like beating around the bush. If I was listening to this, I'd be like, well, what the hell happened? Like what do you actually like? What transpired that you're so like? In the most simplest terms, it was like the Susquehanna Mystery, such a big story. I squeezed it all in a short period of time in a way which could not be understood rationally.
Right.
You could, like, with your logical mind, like, let me understand what that was not possible.
Right.
It was like, and it was done in front of the quilt, and it was done in a very different, like, feeling than what I was speaking the night before.
Right. You were.
And like people were like, "What?
Who is that guy?
What
happened?
Can I ask questions? Like, I don't think I understand. Like, you're not supposed to understand. Like, it was like that. So all of that was happening, and like there was this part of me inside which is like, this is what I am to do.
Archangel Michael got real dark.
But there's this part of me that's like, I also understand, like, no one has any idea. Like, so to me. So part of what this, like all of these ceremonies is, like, there's this part where we then go, and whether it's the starboard or the river map, like, we add to it. Like, so there's a collective weaving. And this is what we did. There's this small little seashell, which we used, which is a very personal, meaningful seashell to you and I.
It's the tip of a seashell.
That broke off.
It's the first seashell I ever gave you.
Right.
And the tip broke.
And it broke, and we used that seashell, and like we passed that around as people said some stuff, and it came back to me, and like in this very kind of like.
We were inviting everyone to, like, once we got kind of through some more of the integration and discussion and like did a little more holding and containing work, and like I think that maybe like there was some song, just right. We kind of.
You softened my edge.
Yes, thank you for saying that. That I took that as a compliment. We invited everyone to use the felt map as a space to integrate with whatever they just received, whatever shift they experienced, right? Because it wasn't all cognitive.
No.
It was definitely like an ayahuasca, like something just happened, and like some people were able to get mental integrated pieces, and other people just caught the spirit,
right?
And like can't necessarily verbalize it,
right?
So everyone was invited to take a stone from our bowl and infuse it with intention and put it on the map wherever they intuitively felt, because no one's familiar with that river,
right?
But just and then you have the tip of the seashell,
and that passed all the way around. Everyone's hand. So I got it, and at this time, like, I'm kind of like, I'm in a different spot. And I think I even had, like, I
didn't even see you do this.
I just kind of like flick it off my thumb, like, and how the map is set up. The map has, like, it's a quilted map.
Yeah.
And I quilted it, and then I had all of these, like, then lines and circles quilted on top of them, and the lines and circles have certain meanings.
Significant energetic portals.
Literally, they correspond to, like, on the earth where those energetic portals are, and it landed in the circle, which is at the headwater of the Susquehanna, right where Cooperstown is, like right where the Herkimer Diamonds are, arguably the most significant spot and the smallest spot. And like, if I were to try to toss something to land in that circle, that's like, it's a very unlikely thing to occur. But it happened perfectly. In fact, even before, like the night before, was it the night before that you flicked it and that same seashell landed on the starboard?
It wasn't the night before. It was as we were setting up for this ceremony.
Right.
I had the bowl of rocks in my hand.
Right.
And I was like, oh, here's the seashell tip. Like,
right.
I didn't know where it had gone. And so and you were like, ooh, can I hold on to it, or can I hold it? And I tossed it to you. Like, we were on opposite ends of the blanket, and I tossed it to you, and it landed in the center of the starboard.
Right.
Right? And then when you tossed it, it landed in the center, not just like near or on the circle, or within the circle.
And the circle is the size of a quarter.
And it landed in the center of the circle.
And the shell is about the size of like
half my pinky.
Yeah, like half your pinky now.
Half my pinky long.
Right.
Long waist.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was like, that was the thing. So to me, like, despite all of I was like, okay, this is, whatever the level of reality which, dictates the dream, like, that's like giving me like, okay, this is how it should be. So that's how the kind of the ceremony ended.
Mm-hmm.
We go pack up. It's probably like, I don't know, like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And we go back to the cabin.
Yeah. Okay, so this was like, we hadn't processed anything yet. You and I were still in this space of like, holy Hannah, what, like that was big. Like we just like birth is like bloody and messy.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a lot of liquid, you know, like it's not pretty, but it's beautiful. And it's like powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, like the most like manifested form of like co-creation, right, of human. And it was very much like that, like, and we were sitting with that individually,
right.
And do you want to tell?
Well, you start.
Okay, so we're you know, this is one of the colder of the nights, and so like got Naomi all bundled up and warm, and then we were getting all bundled up and warm, and I just was like, I can't sleep. Like, we literally did the ceremony, brushed our teeth, got in sleeping bags, and no post-processing,
right,
which is something we do a lot of.
Right.
And I was like, I don't think I can sleep. And is that when it happened?
I think that's when it happened.
As soon as I said that, and you invited, okay, like, let's talk. What, like, right? The owl. Is that? We heard a sound.
It wasn't just a sound.
Well, what would you call it? A noise?
So it was like, I mean, in the most literal sense. So like, let's take it on like baseline reality, like, you know, no sort of dream walking. Like it was most likely like an owl was maybe...
an owl was...
eating, attacking, what word would, like found a prey.
Yeah.
Which was very vocal.
Yeah.
Like I hit...
Both of them, both
the owl, and then what do you think it was? Like it almost sounded like a pig. It sounded like a squealing pig. It wasn't a pig.
It wasn't a pig. It was a small rodent.
But it was a loud one, and
maybe
it
wasn't small. Maybe it was large.
Whatever it was, and it lasted for probably 30 seconds, a minute. Like it wasn't like something like, oh, what was that? Like you heard it.
Well, so the night before we heard the owl.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure it's a great horned owl.
Just like the hooting.
Just because it has a very specific type of owl sound.
And a month earlier.
Oh, right. And so moving into dream walking a little bit, a month before, I was like blessed with this owl. I found an owl alongside the road.
Right. Just like probably just struck by a car, like it was.
Just struck by a car.
But it was fresh in a way.
And I was able to sit with it. And if you want to hear more about Mary and the owl, like you can go to my blog and read that story.
But it was a deep, rich, incredibly significant experience.
Right. There was a lot of ceremony involved. There was a lot of bloody, visceral body. Yeah. I don't really feel like telling that, but we buried
as a symbol, it was ripe. It was ripe in our mental space. So like an owl sound, like when we heard it the night before, like, I mean, you're going to hear an owl in the forest, but it was particularly significant.
Yes, there was
in
a
the
particular
timing.
Kinship.
Yes.
Because there was a lot of deep ceremony with this specific, like, species of owl too.
Right.
So there was a specific kinship the night before that began. And then so that at this moment, as we were like going into our darkness of sleep, and we had just
trying to discuss like what the hell just happened.
Trying to discuss what just ceremonially happened, the owl called again. And at first just did its normal call. And so I started talking again.
Right.
But then it called again. And the calls got more and more intense. And then I thought one of the staffers was doing owl speak. Like you can talk back and forth with birds. Because I had never heard that level of an owl's vocal ability.
Right.
And then you heard the squealing of another animal. And they were like, auditorily listening to location. They were right on top of each other.
Right.
And they weren't too far from our hut.
Not at all.
And so the next morning.
So we heard that. I don't even think, did we even really discuss, like,
no.
We didn't even acknowledge that happened.
Because we had our own owl shadow dark thing going on that we needed to, like, hold and wrap up. We didn't even discuss it. We just listened. Because it was such a nature performance. It was such a significant, like you don't even, like what just happened, like what had just ceremonially happened with like in our world, this owl, this owl experience. It was almost like we can't even talk about that because it was just so like intense and different. And like, what do you make of that? We're gonna just have to talk to people tomorrow morning,
right?
Which is what we did. But did you want to say anything more about the night?
So I remember, like that entire evening was including the owl. And like, I mean, everything from the ceremony to like the cold of us sleeping, and then the owl. It all felt very, like in the most literal sense, like dreaming. Like it felt like disassociative. Yeah. Like in the way like I'm kind of watching something else. And I don't always feel that way, but I felt that way. Like deep, in life.
Deep shift. Like we were deep internal, and like deep shift was happening. Deep shit was happening.
And I knew, or at least in my mind, when I was listening to that owl, like there was no doubt that owl sound and what was happening was intimately somehow, like however it all works, like connected.
Right. Yes.
To what just happened.
So like I would say like deep shamanic forest shifts were occurring.
Right.
And it wasn't like we were like meta, like outside, like walking in like the 9 Mile walk or the Jekyll walk. It was more like an inner, like I said, meta, not being above but being under.
Right.
Like going down under in self, and like and shifting in group, in community, in connection, like in the messiness.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so the next morning, I heard people talking about it around the fire, and people who had been there for a month working.
People with experience, people who know the sounds of this forest.
This specific forest had some didn't even know what it was. And I was like, it was like probably an owl, probably a great horned owl, like because of the call. And Constantine said, we've been here for over a month, and I've never heard anything like that while here. And that's when it hit me. I was like, yeah, that was really significant, but like, wow, that was like specifically like once a month, once maybe a season. I don't know, that the owl would strike that close to the common center, strike it and find its prey.
And the prey to be so loud. And like the whole, everything about that.
Yes.
And then to me, the timing.
Yes. Oh, the timing.
And then that would always be like an interesting, a noteworthy experience. Like if you're just a regular traveler, like, hey, guess what I heard? Like that would have been noteworthy. I put it in my travel log. But the symbol of the owl was so rich in the timing of the unfolding of our lives. Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left in this before we gotta stop.
Right.
And I know where I want to go and kind of wrap this up.
Okay.
So I'm going to kind of jump forward fast, but I want to tie it directly to the owl.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the next day we left. Mm-hmm. The next day we left, and where we went was down to a state park in Florida, Juniper Springs. Mm-hmm. Very, very different energy.
Totally.
Like in every way.
It's a national park.
It's a state park in a national forest.
Thank you. Yes.
And it's not so much about a forest as much as it is about springs, and so you could look at those energy and all of that sort of stuff. I began this conversation, or at least the Susquehanna Mystery portion of our conversation, about our Starboard ceremony of the final phase of that wolf moon lunation. And I knew that those difficult cards we only picked were going to be they're only if we want to go by there's you're tied to cards, you're tied to what that phase was linked to. So I was very aware that those cards, we had that that it was abysmal, which was Tai Chi, or the I Ching, and we did I Ching work with Ethan there, which is wild because the abysmal is one of the 8. But anyway,
yes.
The second night where we went to down in Juniper Springs was then the new moon. So in my mind, I knew that window was closing, which included that phase.
And you were like...
And part of me was excited, but part of me was like, all right, what's going to be the next cards? Like all this sort of stuff. So I just want to kind of end with that Starboard ceremony and why in connection to the owl event, whatever that is, whatever narrative, what we're describing is the actual events, and then if we want to go deeper into meaning, that's when you get into the narrative. But I'm comfortable sitting right now, let's just hold those as the touch points. So we went to Juniper Springs. It's kind of warmer. It's not much warmer, but we're there. We do our Starboard ceremony. The Starboard ceremony we did in Hostel on the Forest was in a geodesic dome. We were under a canopy. We couldn't see the sky. We had our campsite. We're in tents. Our campsite, we had an actual view of the stars.
Oh, now we're at Juniper.
Now we're at Juniper Springs. So when we do the new moon Starboard ceremony, the setting is perfect.
Out in the open.
It's literally out in the
outside.
open. Most of them, at least recently, haven't been able to be outside because it's been cold and all this sort of stuff. We're outside, we've got the right view of the ecliptic. Not only that, it's a new moon. It's not just a new moon, it's a new moon on the spring equinox, which is now we've got solar and lunar connected. And the spring equinox corresponds, at least on the tropical zodiac, the beginning. So it's all of these beginnings. So to wrap up this portion, this last chapter, at least what I want to say, is that after going through, which could very well be thought of, we can look at the new moon is starting at the spring equinox, starting at the beginning of the zodiac, as a new big cycle, larger than just the illumination. It definitely was that because it's a new moon, but we could even look at it also in terms of a lunar cycle. It came right at the heels of the owl. The owl, which on a certain level represents the end of another cycle. What cycle? Whatever it was, it's prey.
Yeah.
That would be...
The snake eating its tail.
That was the sacrifice.
That was this... Every time we do this, there's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
At the 9 Mile walk with Ross
Ben.
Someone got shot when we dropped Ross Ben off.
Yeah.
When we were doing the thing at Hostel. What happened at Jekyll Island?
Oh, and here's the last thing, and that was the Hostile.
Do you remember at Jekyll Island?
What?
Naomi did she did the ceremony with the
jellyfish, the dead jellyfish.
We had a dead jellyfish friend that we were playing with the whole time.
It was kind of
sand.
Yeah.
It was weird, but this is what Naomi and I do. We find artifacts on the ocean, on the sand, and we play.
Right.
We make
you became a person,
or we animate them. I know it's weird, but so Naomi had this it was I've never seen a jellyfish like that.
I hadn't either.
The insides were beautiful and all still intact, but it had washed up. It was dead. And at the end, Naomi took a palm branch.
Right.
We were talking about the offering trays too.
Right.
It looked very much like an offering tray with a basket. It had the palms. She put the jellyfish on it and she said, "Come on, guys!" She's "You have to come. We have to do the death ceremony."
Right.
And she offered the dead jellyfish back into the ocean, flipping it over.
Yes.
It is part of it's oh wow. It's a theme.
Yeah, it's a theme. This is literally so let's go back. So this is dream walking. This is being able to see just the regular life also from a meta perspective.
Yes.
So outside of it.
Right.
And seeing it both unfold in terms of your inner space narrative, your living experience narrative, but then also I think the whole nature of what we do is meta paradigm shift and all of this sort of stuff.
And you can't. It's this. This is something I like to obsess over and philosophize over. Is the light and the dark, death and life, masculine, feminine. You can't take one without the other.
Okay.
If you're going to go into something big, deep, wide.
Okay.
If you're looking for a transformation or a shift, or you know, even if you like want to like impact the world, or like, you know, like all these movements focus, like the feminist movement, like that then did damage to like the masculine because it was so feminine focused, right? And like our dream walking, we can't have life without death. Like death is always present in our really significant like life affirming, like a lot of energy coming back into us. Then there's always like an element of death. And then like we're also now talking about river magic and star magic, and like getting really grounded in the fact that like we both have ancestry and roots in like magical people, like people who practice, for me, like hexcraft and real true like energy shifting spells and charms, and it's like, you know, you gotta be careful. Like this is like, the magnitude is huge, but also like we're coming at it from such a meta space that we're able to look in at it and see it all in context, so that there's safety, right? It's not like we're not spooked by these things. At least I'm not. Are you? You like to be spooked.
I like the scary stuff.
Right. And I mean, for me, it's not about spooked as much as like taking it seriously.
Right.
I mean, we have fun with it, but it's not all just fun and games.
Right.
It's also
because someone's
real.
Gotta die.
It's also serious, because there is like, there's with life, there's death. Right. Like the meta paradigm shift isn't all just about anchoring light. It's about also like, you know, like we're anchoring the dark too. You can't have one without the other.
Well, the whole nature of collapse is like, you know, like if what we're talking about literally, I mean, it is happening. Like you go and you look and we have all been born into like you could be as big of a cultural critic as possible, but if you're born into it, it's part of you, and if it does collapse, like there's a part of you which is also going to. There's
internal death.
There's going to be a death, and there should be a reverence, and there's going to be a
reverence. That's a great word.
And you know, sometimes whether that's tied to being like a sadness, or you know, that period is done. And to make room for something else. And so
reverence is a good word. I don't like serious. I like reverence. Because I also like being irreverent.
I mean,
I don't know how much you like to be irreverent. Well, so anyways, that I think that summarizes our Hostel in the Forest to Juniper Springs adventure.
So we didn't really get into anything else in Juniper Springs.
No, but I think if there's a part 3 of Adventures in the Shift coming,
there definitely is, because we have to cover Juniper Springs, we have to cover villages.
And now we've been in the villages.
We've been in the villages, and then we're going to have to go into Venice.
And then we're going to Venice.
Venice Beach, Florida.
Venice is our vacation.
That's the vacation.
I think so. I'm hoping. I mean, this whole thing has been like, we've been like doing work and like serving and traveling. Meeting with people. Like right now we have to stop because we're going to meet with the astrologers of the villages.
We're literally meeting with the astrologers of the villages. It's the funniest thing.
And so I'm hoping that when we get to that,
there's going to be the question is there going to be part 3 or part 3 and part 4?
Dun dun dun.
There we go. So how do we go and wrap up?
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, and stay tuned.
For going on this adventure with us.
Yeah, because without witnesses, it's just going to be in our own head.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Right.